We seek answers, we seek certainty, we want to know what is going on.
Why are we drawn to conspiracy theories?
I think it can all be trickled down to us trying to make sense of a really complex world that we live in. And conspiracies typically arise when that complication's really ramped up. So it could be during a moment of crisis, which could be personal, something in your own life, or it could be societal. So, a virus outbreak, political change, something that really kind of frustrates some of the needs that we have. And in those moments, we seek answers, we seek certainty, we want to know what is going on. And a conspiracy theory can often offer a simple explanation for what that complex kind of crisis is kind of happening in front of us.
The idea that they make sense of a complex world, but the conspiracy theories that at least I'm aware of, like, that doesn't make any sense. It always seems like, yeah, you're simplifying something, but the conspiracy theory is far more complex than the actual thing that's happening. The idea that kind of, no, the person that I voted for isn't lying to me. The real truth is it's a deep state and the president's been cloned. Like,
it offers that certainty in the sense of it feels way more, in essence, you can hold on to it and go, wow, look, okay, this is what's happening behind the scenes. Whereas typically the official explanation often isn't as interesting, often isn't as entertaining, often doesn't kind of tickle the needs that we have when we want to understand what is happening in a particular issue. And indeed, the conspiracy can point the finger. That's what makes it simpler, in the sense that it can point the finger at a group that typically you don't like, or a group that you don't find trustworthy. It is also that kind of intergroup phenomenon where it's us versus them.
Is this the kind of thing that only happens to certain people, or can everybody kind of get into this?
So there's not a profile of who's more likely to believe in a conspiracy theory, or rather, who is a conspiracy theorist. I often think that actually, in the right circumstance, anyone could be drawn into a conspiracy theory. Because in a way, when you may have the skill sets to kind of evaluate and to criticize, but when you are feeling anxious and threatened and your self-image is frustrated, it can be difficult to try and think clearly through the skill sets that may have been taught at school, for example. So we know that if you're discriminated against, you're more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. Probably because you have actually been at the brunt of a conspiracy against you and your group. And as such, it makes you see the world through this conspiratorial lens. It could also, of course, be, down to our personality. There are some studies that have shown that if you're more narcissistic, you potentially are more conspiratorial. And that's probably because you have a real desire to have a positive image of yourself and your group. So as such, you're really leaning into the idea that the other group are doing bad things.
Does it tie to intelligence in any way?
So there is work demonstrating that those who typically have typically who have less education, shall we say, so less likely to have gone to university, are slightly more conspiratorial. But it can also be, as I've mentioned, the most intelligent also still being conspiratorial. I think it definitely is a safeguard because it gives you, i.e., education, obviously gives you skill sets to be able to navigate the world. And of course, the world's even more complex than it was before with the internet and all manner of information that we're exposed to. But I don't feel it's a silver bullet whereby that if you're feeling anxious, you can suddenly use these skill sets. Potentially, it's a mixture of being able to have the skills, maybe through education or through other means, but also be able to maybe regulate your emotions, kind of deal with that moment of crisis in that moment, then be able to use your skill sets. So as I say, whilst evidence to suggest that education absolutely plays a role, I personally think it's more complicated than that. And that could explain why you do get a variety of different people believing in conspiracies.
How come we don't self-correct?
Well, with self-correction, it's in essence, it's being aware of what the truth is. So I'm using the word truth to be what we see the truth to be. Often truth can come from gatekeepers of knowledge. So that could be scientists, that could be the government. But of course, if you are distrusting of those groups, you don't trust scientists to tell you the truth about vaccination for whatever reason. You are going to digest content, news, information from your family, your friends, through that kind of lens of distrust. So in a way, you probably won't necessarily be aware that you're necessarily doing that. So it could be really difficult to kind of self-correct you in that moment. I've interested, some other work has demonstrated that people who are more likely to believe in conspiracies are to say, I'm a critical thinker. I think for evidence. I ask questions. But then objectively, when people are given critical evaluation measures and kind of different behavioural tasks, they actually were not critical with the information that they digested. So as such, they thought they were being critical, but in actual fact, they were not. Which kind of leads into the point there about self-correction, in the sense of they may perceive they are, but in reality, they are not.
That's what I was, okay, I don't think I'm going to ask this question very well, but hopefully it kind of makes sense. Are conspiracy theories the symptom or the disease, in the sense that, let's say I believe in chemtrails. Is it really just about chemtrails, or is it about the idea that I don't trust the government? Does belief in a conspiracy theory symbolize a broader belief in everything else?
Yes, it's a symptom, in the sense of people will be drawn in by certain types of conspiracy theories. I'll say that is true. But it really does kind of grapple with one's worldview. In essence, the lens that someone perceives the world to be in. So if you see the world full of conspiracies, you will likely see conspiracies wherever you kind of look. If conspiracies exist in climate change, well, they probably exist in vaccination, political change, virus outbreaks. They all really kind of hang together, because, it's kind of difficult to imagine a time where, let's say, you distrust the government, but you think, oh, actually, I distrust them in climate change, but not in vaccination. Like, it probably kind of really hangs together, that if that distrust is there and that cynicism is there about that one issue, it's going to bleed in to hold other things.
Full disclosure, I don't believe in any conspiracy theories, simply because you can't get two people to show up at a party on time. I don't think that you can, simply because of logistics. Like to me, the logistics argument crushes all conspiracy theories. But we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but to be more specific of it, like, are they dangerous? Is this ultimately a dangerous thing, or you don't believe the moon landing was real, so what?
So I think it's a good one to start with the moon landing, in that in isolation, it does feel like a bit of fun. It feels like how exciting to think about, to theorize about the moon and it all never happened and all what was going on. But of course, that can also breed distrust, right? So like, if you're exposed to this content, let's say you come neutral towards this and you're exposed to this content, maybe over a period of time, it becomes part of your rhetoric. Well, that's going to really question how, your trust in NASA, in trust in science, trust in other types of kind of moon expeditions. You'll go into Mars. It makes you question, what else have they been involved in? And of course, therefore, if you're not trusting science, that could really impact how you engage with scientific issues. So, whether you want to get vaccinated, whether you, want to reduce your carbon footprint because of climate change happening. So suddenly you could see how distrust in one issue can suddenly bleed into distrust in other issues. Another consequence, of course, is that you are pointing the finger at different conspirators and blaming them for the wrongdoing. That could be the government, but it could also be different minority groups who you find to be threatening. And as such, that has therefore been linked with, the uptick potentially in violent extremism towards those groups, which of course can be the government, but also can be many other different groups. That is where a real kind of clear danger comes in conspiracy theories, that they can be used as a way to kind of, well, actually, I better go and stop the conspiracy. I better go and stop that group doing that bad thing.
Are there certain aspects of a conspiracy theory that will really make it stick? Like if it has this, this, and this, so to speak, that's really going to catch hold.
So conspiracy theories can be kind of complicated to kind of get right. I bet if you were to look at the internet, there's probably thousands of different types of theories that are out there, but only some of them really kind of tickle people's fancies, really kind of address some of those needs. In a way, it really has to have a clear group. That group has to be perceived to be threatening and perceived to be powerful. So it cannot be, for example, me or teenagers. It has to be the government, has to be, scientists, has to be a tangible group. And they have to, do something that kind of makes sense for that group, to plot and scheme, to cover up different facts about vaccination, for example. And then the motive has to, again, make sense. It can't just be, for fun, for whatever reason. It has to be, for usually self-interest, for profit, for control. So therefore, you could suggest, that scientists cover up the facts about vaccination for profit. Suddenly, that's a conspiracy theory that can make sense. If you swap out one of the ingredients and suddenly you say teenagers are covering up vaccination for profit, that doesn't make sense. That's what makes me think about popular conspiracy theories, is that they really got those ingredients in hand. And actually, you can map these ingredients back to all different types of conspiracy theories. I don't think there's anything unique about climate change, vaccination, intergroup conspiracies, because they all kind of come from this kind of like almost this recipe of how to make the perfect conspiracy theory.
Are you ready for some harder/listener submitted questions?
Cool.
What would you say is the most popular one?
I'd say popular ones are really geared around political. And that's probably because people, of course, have their political orientation can be so important to them. And, it really kind of governs their day to day. So believing in conspiracies about, the election as being rigged, that can be really kind of powerful. But it's worth noting that can switch around depending on who is in power. It doesn't matter necessarily the group is in power, for example, Republicans or Democrats. It depends on election night. You typically, the group, whoever it is, who loses, are more likely to say it's rigged. And that doesn't matter who they are.
I was always fascinated. It's like, if I win, it's not rigged. If I lose, it's rigged. Like, wait a minute.
Absolutely. And there's data that some political scientists have looked at, and they can see how the conspiracy belief about being rigged can pretty much change overnight.
The wildest one that you're familiar with, one that you're like, oh God, how did you get that from that?
So a wild one, I asked some students a few years ago about some theories that they know of, they've heard of. And one person said to me that they've heard that Beyonce is a robot because it's all about making more money from her her dancing, from her music. And I thought, oh wow, okay. Beyonce being a robot. So of course I Googled it, as anyone should. And then there's loads of pictures of here's Beyonce and here's Beyonce as a robot. Here she's a robot. You can tell from her eyes that she's a robot. So I thought that was the most bizarre one. But I guess it leans into conspiracies about popular culture, so suggesting that certain celebrities have died and been replaced by a lookalike, like Avril Lavigne, for example. Those are certainly bizarre ones that are a bit different to the political realm, but I think nonetheless are quite interesting.
Yeah, I love the Paul McCartney one.
Paul McCartney, yeah, that was a very famous one. Yeah, of course.
Most dangerous. Which one would you look at and be like, you know what, that has had a negative impact on society?
I suppose most dangerous conspiracy is ones that can't really target the minority groups, because as we've seen, they can really incite violence towards those groups. It really kind of paints that picture of that group is doing bad things, and the reason that we, society, whatever it is, are having problems is because of that particular group, which I think can be really dangerous, both for how people react to that group, but also even turning the dial slightly and thinking about how a conspiracy theory about your group can impact you as that group member. We know that actually it can make people feel threatened, feel angry, feel anxious. It can make people not want to engage with wider society because they believe that people have these beliefs about them and their group. So actually, in fact, it can really impact intergroup relations, both by violence, but also how that group actually feels and behaves.
putting things kind of in perspective, right? Like we're always prisoners of the moment and conspiracy theories seem all over the place. Have we always believed in this? Like if we go back to Roman times, are there conspiracies about Caesar and
It's not a new thing, it's a very old thing. Because I think all I've talked about so far really is just human psychology that he's always been with us. We're kind of hardwired to kind of have this. So actually, yeah, we can trace back these kind of conspiracy narrative right to the start, explaining, I think, believes it was fires in Rome, that it was all part of a conspiracy, which, is way before probably the time of even calling it a conspiracy theory, but nonetheless, it is there. Some scholars actually think that actually back in the day, conspiracy theories could actually have an evolutionary advantage. What they mean by that is if you believe that there's a conspiracy happening, that there's someone else across the plane who are coming to get you and your group, that can actually make you, want to survive, actually kind of be up for fighting, be up for kind of protecting you and your group. Does it matter if there really is a group out there or not? Because nonetheless, you are ready to kind of survive. Whereas in today's world, we don't necessarily need that fight or flight response where to have the conspiracy that someone's out to get you, whether it's true or not, it actually can lead to us, to be maladaptive. Whilst before it can make us survive, actually now it can make us not get a vaccine and actually indeed maybe die.
are all conspiracy theories big conspiracy theories? In the sense that are they always about the moon landing, or can they be about like I think my mother-in-law is secretly poisoning me?
The conspiracies can be really localized. I think a good example actually is believing that your boss is conspiring, believing in workplace conspiracy theories, and actually how that can impact your work behaviours. We've talked before about those societal issues, vaccination, climate change, but actually if you believe your management is conspiring, that can impact your job satisfaction. It can impact how committed you are in that workplace. It can also impact whether you want to stay in that employment. But of course, that can be brought out to other kind of issues, maybe to do with thinking about if you're a teenager in school, believing that your head teacher's conspiring against you and your fellow pupils. I'm sure that would have a similar impact on your well-being. It really is pointing the finger and seeing that others, typically another group of people who are perceived to be powerful, are conspiring. And that can be about big issues, but could also be about things that are in your everyday.
Conspiracy theory you got closest to believing? One that you looked at and was like, oh man, I don't know about that.
I mean, like, it's hard because often I think about these issues quite a lot. I also sometimes think, I don't know if I could do this. Like, to believe, for example, that the government, particularly thinking that towards the UK government, could orchestrate such a complex event, and importantly, to keep it covered up, that no one else knows about it, i.e., 10 years later, there's been no whistleblowers, no journalists pulling it out, like other types of conspiracies. It makes me think it just is not possible. I just don't believe it's possible. Like ages ago, a few years ago, some scholars did some modelling to work out how many years it would take for 9/11 to be covered up and for it to come out. And they worked that out that by the number of people that would have to be involved, it actually would have been I believe it was 10 years or something. That it would, someone would have, by probability sake, it would have come out in the wash. So that's kind of where I land on that. I'm just very, very skeptical in a way, which is a good place to be. I asked lots of questions.
Like, if the moon landing was fake, like, there's no way somebody's going to cover that up for 60 years. Like, anyway, I could digress about that stuff. Oh, what do you think is the future of them? Where do you think that they go from here?
I expect they'll always be here. I expect those key ingredients will always be around. But what I feel has changed is that people are a bit more aware of them. Now, we're having a conversation now about them. I think being aware of the logistics of them, being aware of the makeup, being aware of the impact, might necessarily change beliefs straight away, but I feel like knowledge is power. That even if you're a bit more critical of what you read, that you may start asking a bit more questions than you did before. As we kind of move forward and we learn more about digital literacy, and that's more embedded in our schools, maybe also resilience, emotional resilience, maybe all these things will come together that kind of lead to us kind of be more critical of kind of the information sources that we digest. So I think, therefore, they'll always be there, but I just hope that we'll be having more of a critical eye for them because there's more knowledge about what they are and the impact that they have.
If somebody really is being affected by this, how can they kind of talk someone out of it?
I think it's super difficult to try and target someone's belief in a conspiracy theory because, as we've talked about so far, they will be resistant to trying to correct that because they may struggle with self-correction because they see that as the truth. So instead, I think it's really interesting to think about the journey that person's been on. So, ask some simple questions. When did this belief start? What does this belief offer you? Just kind of understand, what do they talk about? Did they mention that they felt anxious? They never answered. Did they mention they felt lonely, ostracized? Try to understand a bit about, why they're there. Which means instead of trying to debunk that conspiracy theory, which indeed you could try to, but I think it would be quite difficult, you can try and help with some of the psychology. So to say, if they mention they feel lonely, well, maybe try and encourage them to kind of engage with their community. If they mention they feel quite anxious, out of control, try and think about ways to try and help with that kind of moment. Try and think about times that you do feel in control and how to kind of deal with one's anxiety, which therefore, if you kind of build them up for success, it may mean they're less likely to kind of be pulled back into the conspiracy theory. Of course, that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be, that's the conversation over a long period of time. And maybe it'll come to the point where you can talk to them about their belief. But I certainly know that if someone came to me with a particular theory about 9/11 or climate change or vaccines, I'm not in a place that I could debunk that theory. I don't know the specifics. You want to talk to the expert in climate change, in vaccination, to be able to do that.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like look for the soft emotion.
Humanizing them, trying to understand their journey and thinking how we can kind of, deal with some of their emotions and their needs that they have, which means that they can then maybe in a better place to think through the information. Could be a way that we as individuals could help. Because I would struggle to have that conversation otherwise.
But is there something about conspiracy theories that researchers such as yourself are still trying to figure out?
I suppose, of course, the big next question, right, we understand a bit more about the psychology of why they believe and their harm, is how do we intervene? We've talked about different conversation starters there, but are there particular interventions that seem to work really well? Are there things people can do in school that could be useful? Because, of course, conspiracy beliefs also happen in teenage years. It's not something for adults only, it's something for everyone. So actually, are there certain classroom activities, certain resources that are quite useful? But also, as I say, I think it's also dealing with more the psychology of, let's say, resilience, emotions. So actually, developing interventions that could target both of them, I think could be quite important. So actually, therefore, is how we address some of the consequences is a big next question.
What do you think is the single most interesting thing about conspiracy theories? The thing that you always come back to?
Always come back to how they can always really try to make sense of that complicated world. Even though, as you mentioned, actually you said the conspiracy themselves can also be quite complicated, it can promise to be reassuring. It can promise to make you feel better. But in actual fact, they're probably not satisfying. They can make you feel more distrusting. They can change how you see other people. They can change your behaviors. They may, seem appealing, but they're not satisfying. I find always that quite interesting.
That's pretty much all the questions that I got. What's kind of coming up next for you? How can people find out more? All that kind of stuff.
So I'm always looking into conspiracy psychology. There's always new questions to be asked, which is always fascinating. You can obviously follow my website at danieljolly.co.uk and I post updates there. But, just look out for papers, talks, I'm always kind of trying to get myself out there to kind of educate on the psychology of conspiracy theories.
But is there something about conspiracy theories that researchers such as yourself are still trying to figure out?
I suppose, of course, the big next question, right, we understand a bit more about the psychology of why they believe and their harm, is how do we intervene? We've talked about different conversation starters there, but are there particular interventions that seem to work really well? Are there things people can do in school that could be useful, because of course conspiracy beliefs also happen in teenagers. It's not something for adults only, it's something for everyone. So actually, are there certain classroom activities, certain resources that are quite useful? But also, as I say, I think it's also dealing with more the psychology of, let's say, resilience, emotions. So actually developing interventions that could target both of them, I think, could be quite important. So actually, therefore, is how we address some of the consequences is a big next question.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Profoundly Pointless. From society and sexuality to science and sports, every week we explore something new from a side of life you may never have heard of. Subscribe if you're interested. There's a playlist, I think, on the right if you want to see more videos like this. Someday I'm going to finish painting that wall, and just for the record, I'm not orange. I just don't know how to fix this. But thanks for checking out the show. Would love to hear from you. Okay, I should stop. Stop. There it is.